Yourself, I'd say Fionn, if you want to introduce yourself as well after me, and then we could go in a row. But hello, everyone. I'm sure everyone knows me. I am the Vice President of Education in the City Campus in TU Dublin SU. And I've just finished my course 2 years ago. So this is my second year running. And yeah, we're here for Black History Month, as Fiona said. So I will pass you on to Fiona to give you a brief little introduction of who he is, and we'll pass it on.
Yeah, brilliant. Like I said, my name is Fionn. I am the Deputy President of the City Campus and really excited for the webinar today. And I'm going to pass you on now to Bukky, who's going to introduce herself.
Yeah, once I can get my mic on mute. Hello, everyone. My name is Bukky Adebowale, and I am the current Vice President for Equality and Citizenship at the Union of Students in Ireland. That is a long sentence. But I graduated from Maynooth University as a Bachelor of Science graduate in Biological and Biomedical Sciences. That's also very long. And after that, I ran for election as the Vice President for Student Life in Maynooth Students' Union, and then decided I wanted to switch things up a bit and ran for the national position as the Vice President for Equality and Citizenship. So yeah, I'm excited to be here today. So I might pass it on to someone else. Do you want me to do that, Hamza?
Yep. Pass it on.
Okay, pass it on to Jacinta.
Hi everyone, I hope you're well. My name is Jacinta and I am part of the organisation Black and Irish. I'm the community coordinator, so that role involves multiple things pertaining to the community and community development. My education background resides in social work, so I'm a social worker by profession. But yeah, community coordinator Black and Irish. So yeah, Pierre, do you want to go ahead there?
Thanks, Jacinta. Hi, everybody. My name is Pierre Yinbach. I also work with Jacinta at Black and Irish. I'm the governance director, as is in the name, oversee the governance of the organization. And my previous, I guess, if you don't know me, my qualification, I guess, is law from DIT, as it was DIT back in 2017. And then I stayed on and became the vice president for education, like Hamza himself. And then president of the DIT Students Union, and then the first president of TU Dublin Students Union. So, and I currently work in Engineers Ireland also at the moment as my day job, really. But a pleasure to be invited back again, and I look forward to this evening's panel discussion.
Perfect. Thank you, everyone, for their little brief introduction. And I'd say we can kick off. I don't know what we'll start off with, but we can just start off with just maybe, I don't know, I say just racism in Ireland in a whole. Like, do you think that racism in Ireland is to the same caliber as like maybe racism in the States or even in the UK, or just kind of general? So who wants to kick it off? I see Bukky smiling.
I'm smiling because Hamza, you just started it off. Right? You just get into it. You know?
Get into it, straight into it.
This is an interesting question because previously in the last year or so, there's been a lot of comparison as to whether, you know, we're worse, we're better, we're the same as like, you know, the US or the UK. I think every country is quite unique in terms of, you know, the history and in terms of the current structure and in terms of like migration, people who come in and come out. So everyone, I think, is really unique. Ireland is very unique in that it is quite young when it comes to things like, you know, immigration, and I would say that in that sense of the word. But I think it has its own issues that can be sometimes likened to the likes of the States and the UK, but also it has its own kind of unique kind of traits when it comes to aspects of like racism and discrimination. I don't think I can go any more specific than that, but yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think Bukky is right. Like, you know, racism can manifest in different ways and look different in different countries and in different settings. So even in Black and Irish here, so we wouldn't have research per se maybe in the future, but from the anecdotal evidence we've seen and from the stories that we've gotten, it's clear that racism does happen in Ireland and people do experience it from a young age. People witness their parents experience it growing up. So it's definitely something that happens here, and it does happen internationally, but yeah, you know, it'll always look different in different it's a complex topic, but yeah, of course happens.
Yeah, I agree with the both views also, and I guess the point that I want to make is that I think Ireland was too stuck in the mindset of trying to compare ourselves to the US and UK, and especially after the nature of the George Floyd, everybody obviously was trying to be supportive of the movement and everything like that, but also trying to showcase, oh, we're not like them, we're not like the US, we're not like the UK. And I think that's sometimes an issue, is that we think when we think of racism, we think of the worst part of racism. But like as the just said, like the anecdotal evidence is that there has been experiences and there's continued experience of some form of racism in Ireland for many of our community, through the microaggressions or through the questions of where are you really from, all those kind of instances that, as we are too common to know ourselves from our own experiences. So I think it's important that Ireland realizes that, you know, there's no point of trying to fixate ourselves and trying to see who's worse and how we don't want to be like them. It's about how we can be better with the situations and issues that we have here. So we're not, you know, too clean on that side of things, but we're grateful we're not as bad. But let's not to be too fixated on the worst aspect of racism when there still is some form of racism in this country too.
And I find that can be kind of a scapegoat type of language that's used, where when people don't want to accept that racism exists in Ireland, they'll say, oh, like people, they all need to relax. Like, we're not as bad as America, we're not as bad as England. So it can be dangerous, that rhetoric, I find, you know, so I think we should just leave it out of the discussions of racism, because it can affect discussing the real issues. So yeah.
No, exactly. You all couldn't say it any better than myself. And I agree with all of you. And just with that as well, I know Pierre was touching base on microaggression. Would you say Ireland is kind of deemed to more microaggression than other countries where they're kind of full out, but Ireland is just kind of like, we've got the little bit of microaggression rather than just kind of, if you get what I'm saying, if anyone wants to jump in. And I can probably start with Pierre and give Bukky a little rest, and then we'll go to Bukky second.
Yeah, so if I think what you're saying is that, yeah, are the microaggressions that many maybe experience that their biggest flaw or is our biggest issue? I think, yeah, in some times, and I think unfortunately it doesn't. What's the way of putting it? Because obviously Ireland, I consider a very welcoming country, and everybody is usually of good nature and good crack, and everybody you meet generally all mean well. But the fact that, yeah, they may show in the sly joke or the question of where you're really from. So sometimes it be unintentional, but because it's so common and so, I guess, irritating to some people at times, it kind of builds up and permeates into other issues. So I think it's just, yeah, one of those many things that has grown to become some kind of a common theme around Ireland. And I think that's something that, yeah, in some shape or form it has to be dealt with. And that's where I guess Black and Irish comes in terms of our campaign to try and educate in schools and across society and in businesses about these little issues that do grow up and swell up into racism in some shape or form.
Oh, so I thought you were going to say something there, Hamza. I thought you were
No.
on mute and you wanted to say something. I'm sorry. But yeah, I agree with Pierre. But yeah, in relation to your question, I think, yes, microaggressions are a prominent form of racism in Ireland, but that doesn't mean that, you know, the more direct, you know, racial abuse, people like that still happens and it's still present, but however, people may not notice it. And I find that perhaps people may not say like that type of blunt, rash racism happens in Ireland doesn't happen, but I think if you're not on the receiving end of something, you're not going to see it. You know, like you could speak to many Black people and they will have one or two at least stories of when someone has used the N-word against them, or, you know, use other racial words against them. So the microaggressions type of racism is prominent, and I think people mean well. I genuinely do think people mean well, and have good intentions, but intentions don't determine the impact. You may mean well, but still say harmful things. So I guess yeah, yeah. I'm trying to link it back to the way you asked the question, Hamza. My mind went blank. Yeah, thanks for that question.
I might actually add on to that. I think that's a really interesting question. I did want to see kind of what would have been said about microaggressions. Something that's really interesting about microaggressions in Ireland specifically is that it kind of is very nuanced in that, like Jacinta said, it stems from like, some people are like very well intentioned with what they say, but like doesn't matter, the outcome of what you might say might be really, really aggressive in a sense of the word. And I think that does stem from just microaggressions in general, which is racism, but also undertones and a lack of intercultural understanding within Ireland sometimes. And I think a lot of that can lead into and feed into things like microaggressions, which ultimately can feed into more dangerous things in the future that can be what people might not consider to be something that's potentially here in Ireland, but does happen quite a lot, which is the open, aggressive types of racism that we do see that happen a lot. And I think it all does feed into each other a lot. And we would talk about this a lot within like USI when we're like doing our trainings about the importance of intercultural awareness, because if you understand someone's culture, you're less likely to be microaggressive towards them and less likely to be racist towards them when you understand what background they come from, for example. So like it's always important to kind of flag microaggressions before they become something worse, if that makes sense.
Exactly. You could have said it better, Bukky. Thank you so much, guys, for your input. And then what about talking about then privileges in Ireland? When like social media and stuff, people were talking about white privileges and stuff, so we can probably just touch on base on that if anyone has anything in general to talk about that. And just talking to people here as well, if you want to input or ask any questions throughout, you can stick it in the question and answer, or if you have any comments or anything to add, you're free to do so as well. Or if you want to stick up your hand, I can unmute you if you want to add. And I can then, if anyone wants to talk about that, then who wants to volunteer first?
What's the question, Hamza?
Oh yeah, just talking about privileges in Ireland, your privilege. So just in general, I don't know if I'm not probably
needs to be
yeah,
more specific.
Yeah.
More.
But yeah, no, just kind of like, I don't know, just people kind of, how will I put this? Just kind of remember when everything was going and people were kind of talking about white privileges, and people were like, oh, you don't know what this is and this is that. Just kind of talking about that, touching base on that. If you get me, I don't know if you do get me. I don't know.
Sorry, to clarify the question,
Yeah,
are you asking them in regards to like how white privilege is in Ireland, or?
Yeah, in Ireland. Sorry,
yeah. Okay. There's definitely lots of it. I'm sorry for my input, I'll leave, but yeah.
Well, you can have input in this, John, as well.
You can ask questions.
Yeah, you can ask questions as well. Don't worry.
I don't want to be that token white person, but like I think we definitely have white privilege. Now, I think I for one use my privilege to stand up for the community, especially. I think it's great. I know you guys are going to touch on allyship later on as well, and I think it's very important as someone who's white to realize. I think if you don't realize you have white privilege, I think that's an issue straight up, because there's definitely a gap, and to notice the gap, I think as well, when people say they're like, oh, I don't see color, I think then that's an issue as well, because you have to see color in order to be able to stand up for the Black community. Maybe that's a nice starting topic that you can bounce off that comment.
No, yeah, thanks, Fionn. Yeah, no, that's a good way to pose it. I think, yeah, when obviously when I think of privilege, I don't try and jump straight to the whole issue of white privilege, because it's not just about like, we're not all about like saying, oh, the white are superior and we hate them for that sake because you're white. I think that's just not the way. My mindset's not about that, and I think I'm sure I can speak on behalf of the other two on the panel, is that that's not what we're focused on. I think what I like to consider is that we all have a little bit of privilege in ourselves, and I think someone just put into a chat in terms of the privilege of being Black in college. Is there privilege there? Yes, there's privilege in everything. We have the privilege of being able to either have clothes on our backs, the privilege of having food on the table, or the privilege of being able to go to college, when we know there's so many other people who are Black, or people who are other races, other parts of the world, don't get the same opportunities that we do. Obviously, I understand that there's issues and that students face every day in terms of accommodation and the cost of going to college and things like that. But still, we have the privilege of being able to kind of have the access or the opportunity to do so. So when we start with privilege, I think we shouldn't try and see ourselves start on the basic level of seeing and reflect on ourselves, like what privilege do we have before we go on against, or we go and start checking on everybody else's. But yeah, it is important for those who have privilege, and like I can say now, yeah, those with white privilege that, yeah, to a certain extent do have an advantage, but don't think that that's a bad thing. That even having that advantage, you can use it for good and help others, and especially those in the Black community, where you do have that either influence or that extra guidance or support that you can give to others who may not be so fortunate. And then, yeah, when we talk also of privilege, one thing I also think about is that, and it goes back to in terms of the racism aspect, like one privilege that Irish people have is that they only have one culture that they have to, you know, I guess, live to. But you know, the Black community sometimes have multiple cultures that they have to live by, whether it's culture at home as well as the Irish culture. So being able to understand that people come from different differences and different experiences, and being accepting of that also is a privilege in itself. So that's my only take on that. So I hope it made some sense too.
Yeah, Pierre, that was really good. And I agree. I think privilege is such a huge sociological concept. That's why when I hear privilege, I'm like, oh, it's so broad. Like I think of class privilege and gender, you know, male privilege, like able-bodied people with disabilities. Like there's huge privilege, and everyone carries privilege to a certain extent, and people can be disadvantaged by virtue of how they look, and you know, other things that come with them within their identity. So I'm just thinking of even situational stuff where I've seen videos online where it could be like delivery cyclists getting attacked, and it could be a group of lads attacking, say, Brazilian workers. And there could be then that I seen a video where one white woman was like, oh, stop being fools, like away, and they listened. So she used her privilege for good. I think the potential, I think white privilege, it does exist, of course, as does other types of privileges, but it's like Pierre was saying, it's there, and it can be used for good, especially in instances where racism is happening or discrimination is happening out in the community. So yeah, I think Bukky, if you have something to add. I feel like I'm forgetting so much stuff, but once I hear things, I'm like,
I do
kicking myself after this now.
Like, oh my gosh, when Hamza was like mentioning words, like when Hamza mentioned the word like privilege, I was like, oh my god.
Yeah, I was like, I need a specific.
I was like, I think
that's why I tried, guys. Sorry.
No, like,
privilege,
I think it's a huge word. Like it holds so much weight whenever you hear it the first time. Like even today when we heard it, we're like, oh, the conversation on privilege. It's sort of scary for people, I think, as well, because it's almost got this proper negative connotation around it when you're talking about privilege. The minute you hear it, you're like, oh no, someone's going to start saying that I'm better off. And it nearly, in the case of like, you know, anti-racism, it makes it sound like someone's being called a racist if they have privilege, which is never the case, really. And it's a scary thing for people to kind of imagine that. But in all aspects, I really, really agree with the points that Pierre and Jacinta made before. Like, I think it's important to not be afraid of like the word privilege and what it means in your own life, especially like wherever you may find yourself, whether that's in college or at home. I think it's important to acknowledge those types of privileges and ultimately try your best to see how you can uplift and elevate others to your level or even above that with your own privilege. So yeah, the word privilege is interesting. It shouldn't be something that people are afraid of. I think that you can always try and make these things beneficial and positive for other people around you. And that's like, oh, there's another question in there that's actually really interesting. How do you acknowledge the privilege in the question box? I don't know if anyone's answered that first, but.
If Pierre wants to hop in, and as well, Femi was asking there as well, talking about advantages and what are there, if any, because Pierre touched on it.
Yeah, on Femi's point, yeah, I guess I can't name all the advantages in terms of those multiple, but like I said, once you reflect on your own, you'll see the advantages that you have, like, you know, even starting from now, the advantage that you can join in on the Zoom call and be able to participate in this discussion. You know, we know so much across the world that, you know, sometimes freedom of speech or being able to engage in this kind of discussion is not kind of warranted. So the advantage that you can be able to be, I guess, in a safe space like this and have this conversation and hear from other people and hear their different experiences is a privilege in itself. Besides, touching on the fact that you may have a computer, or you may have a place you can watch this and all that kind of aspect. So that's an advantage. And in terms of like acknowledging it, I think it will go down to a lot of self-reflection. I guess if you reflect on yourself, then that'll be able to then hopefully direct you into how you can, be able to use your privilege or to use the benefit that you've been given to help others in some way. So I think that'll be my way of kind of acknowledging it. It's not like you have to go and shout it out and post it everywhere. But I think a lot of this, like in many cases, when we're speaking about, racism and speaking about being better treating others, it's all down to like your own self-reflection in terms of how you want to be treated is therefore how you should treat others too.
And even like on another point in trying to like recognize and acknowledge privilege, is you can look at scenarios and situations and see opportunities or things that you might have the ability to ignore. So for example, issues that you might have the ability to ignore, whether that be humanitarian issues or racial issues or anything that you can possibly think of, having the ability to be able to say that doesn't really concern me might be able to spark a conversation within yourself and say, why doesn't it concern you? What seems to be the lack between those two? What's the gap between those two? For example, you might be someone who's able-bodied and you might be able to ignore different things that people with disabilities might be going through. That's something that can spark a conversation and thought process within yourself as to, maybe I actually have privileges here in that I'm able to ignore issues like that, whereas someone who has a disability might not be able to do that at all. Those are ways you can kind of think about it. And I think that would be an example of how I would think about it sometimes. So
it's like the whole thing as well that people say when, people say it's a privilege to have to learn about racism, not have to experience it. Like that's a privilege in itself that, I can, well, not me, but like other social issues in society, for example, homelessness, it's a privilege that I can just go off and learn about and study it for years in college and, the causation and all this, but I never experienced it. And there is that, like, and I shouldn't be ashamed of that. Like, I shouldn't be, yeah, I've learned about it. And it's like, but that, like, I still empathize with them though. Like, I shouldn't be resistant. I should, be grateful that, I should be privileged that I know that this is something that I can learn about, and, just no need to be defensive about it. But, yeah, if that makes sense.
It does. I don't know. Thank you guys for that. And I don't know if you've seen that question in the chat. I can read it out to you if you haven't. Do you think it's helpful to think about how people are advantaged or disadvantaged by whiteness as a socio-historical structure? Whiteness understood as a set of cultural norms, assumptions, and practices which establish being white as a norm or particularly valued knowledge produced in the global north. So where whiteness does not straightforwardly describe as an individual or a group of people, although individuals and groups of people do benefit from whiteness. Also the idea that we can be racially differently in different contexts.
Is this question for like, do we think it's good? Like, so does me as someone from Black and Irish think it's helpful to do this, or by like, do the panelists, like what? I'm a bit.
Yes, she said yes.
Oh, so these type of questions, so I feel like sometimes we get them, and I think it's like that whole thing of when, say, if I'm like at a breast cancer event and I'm talking about the issues pertaining to breast cancer, and then someone asks about colon cancer, I'm like, yes, it's equally as important and valid, and there's so many information, but I think that, like, I find my work in Black and Irish is focusing on the struggles, experiences, and successes of the Black and mixed race community. So that whole topic of whiteness is important, and I think anyone who's passionate and is interested in learning about it, I can maybe even learn about it in my own spare time, but my work and my focus in Black and Irish is to focus on racism in the context of the Black and mixed race community. So that's not me dismissing the question or dismissing these important social historical structures. I just think within my role and remit, my priority is the Black and mixed race community and the issues, if that makes sense, me personally. But yeah.
You might also be able to unmute Noreen, if you want, Hamza, if Noreen's comfortable to speak or she can't speak.
Yeah, if Noreen would like to, yeah. And then we can add her up into the panelists if she would like. And then Pierre, I know you were unmuting if you wanted to touch on the topic. Yeah.
No, if Noreen wants to maybe clarify or add more to her question.
A great question, though, very well structured, and I think it's actually very interesting. Thank you for that question, Noreen, honestly.
Am I speaking? Yeah. Sorry, I don't mean to like, I suppose like we're doing work where we're trying to kind of think of racism, not only on the individual dimension, but try to kind of talk to people about the multifaceted like character of racism. You know, we have historical racism, structural racism, institutional racism. All of these come from our histories of kind of colonization and enslavement and segregation, and to really try to understand, you know, the histories of where we are now and why, say, for example, we have direct provision. Like, what are all the norms and assumptions that go into kind of building that system? And I suppose maybe one of the resistances is people think of racism as being a good or bad person. Do you know what I mean? So you say, no, that's racist. And they're like, what do you mean I'm a bad person? You're like, no, I wasn't saying anything about that. Like, I was saying you're kind of acting on your norms and assumptions that you just haven't reflected on. And that a part of the norms and of reflections is whiteness. You know, whiteness is kind of predominant in our educational, a lot of assumptions around how we teach and how we, what we teach, all of these things, do you know? And so like, when you guys were talking about like privilege, I think it's hugely important for us as individuals to recognize I am privileged in X, Y, and I have privilege, but also maybe it's important to think of our histories and the things that exist outside of me that I benefit from, whether or not, you know, irrespective of my my own personal, like whatever I say or do, you know, there's these histories we live it with, kind of a thing, that either I benefit from or I am, you know, for want of a better term, oppressed by. Do you know, it just takes an awful lot of time and work to transform them. And I suppose I'm just thinking about, like, there's an awful lot of fear around talking about whiteness for some people, I think. I don't know. Do you know what I mean? But like, it's an important point of sort of saying, no, it's there. You benefited from whether you acknowledge it or not. Blah blah blah. Sorry, Hamza, I've talked too much.
I think you're actually right, Noreen. I feel like I'm talking too much as well. I think you're right in the sense that, like, even the whole concept of whiteness, I find is like, because we're under the American sphere of influence, like that whole concept of black white is a very, very American thing. Like if you go to South Africa, they have like the black, white, browns, like they would use that type of language. Like I find even using the word white Caucasian is not really a common way of speaking in Ireland. I feel like we've adopted that from America. So that in itself, like reflecting on it, it's interesting, you know. So it's something that to look into, you know.
And just to touch on, one of the points that you made, Noreen, but fantastic question and input you've made really is really being insightful, even on my side of things. Some of the things that, maybe not think about, but like, as you mentioned, there's some great facets to racism that, we maybe focus on like the current aspect of racism, but like I said, there's so much before that, historical and institutional. So like, we need to take that into context and when we're speaking about it. But the point I'd made in terms of like, when we know we're calling out someone maybe, and I think we'll get into the aspect of calling out someone for being racist, they immediately be defensive and think that they're being bad. In the same way, of course, I guess we're going back to days of, when we're being told by a parent for doing something wrong, we're immediately think that we're a bad child or for that sake, or a bad person. But no, really, it's just you're trying to show that person what they said is not, correct, and trying to hopefully show them a better path of how they should, or not how they should treat other people. And that's, I guess, the way Black and Irish is trying to focus on in terms of that inclusivity aspect, is that we're not trying to shout down at people that that this person is racist or this aspect is racism, but like trying to educate people into changing their habits and behaviors in order to make a more inclusive and welcoming country, so that it doesn't become the case of like, if someone did slip up or go to unfortunately go to the case of being racist, is that everybody can be there to educate them and hopefully change their behavior for the future, rather than just being defensive and not taking it on board, and then hopefully not taking anything further after that, really. So thanks again, Noreen.
Yeah, I have to admit that question, when you like really elaborated on it, it's really well thought through, and it's like a really great question for this type of panel. I would talk a lot about decolonization within the work of USI quite a bit. I know a lot of colleagues of mine would know that I talk about this way too much sometimes, and I think it was really pertinent that you asked it right now in terms of the aspect of whiteness and the layers within the institution of racism itself, like how deep it goes and how structurally and institutionally and historically ingrained it is in absolutely everything we do. And there is a sense of fear and sort of like fragility and guilt within talking about the constructs that have allowed the concept of whiteness to kind of be slightly elevated because of the historical context that it's in. There is a bit of a guilt kind of thing going on there, and that's something that is really important to discuss. And like Pierre said and mentioned, it's not to like belittle anyone when we do speak about these things. It's not to put anyone down and say it's not to take reparations by force, essentially. It's to really help people understand exactly why we see small things right now in comparison to historical context, like microaggressions on social media or anything like that. It's important to acknowledge the nuanced perspective of what racism truly is deeply ingrained into, and so that you can understand everything fully and actually get a concept and grasp that concept as to why people like Black and Irish and like myself within USI care so much about anti-racism and being radical about that kind of thing. So I think that it's really important to look at these kind of things, try not to have that guilt, and take it with a pinch of salt, of course, and obviously and understand the perspective. And I think learning in that is great. Like, you'll learn so much and you'll have a better understanding as to how you can make a better change in the future, because you're going to start dismantling things from the core rather than working from a surface level. So I think that's great,
Perfect. Thank you so much. I see Noreen agreeing with you and saying great and absolutely down there. And thank you so much for your input, guys. And then I don't know, I think I see a question there. Can you give any personal experience of advantages that you've had in college just because you're African or Black? Because then does that count as privileged in a sense?
Interesting. This is interesting.
Was that in response to something one of us said or something?
Yeah.
That they've in college just because that does.
Femi, do you want to type in, or if you want us to bring you up and you can explain? I'll see if he wants to come up and see.
So I think it may have been, we scroll.
Raise his hand there, 1 second.
Oh.
Yeah. Go ahead, Femi.
Hold on. Try that again.
We can hear you, Femi.
We can hear you. Go ahead.
Oh, okay, great. Hi everyone. How you doing? Sorry about that. No, it was a question. It was just a general question, really, and I think I mistyped something there. Pardon my excuse there. Pardon the error there. Yeah, no. What I was just trying to say was, is there any personal experience of advantages that you've had in college just because you're an African or just because you're Black or whatever it is, that you've experienced that you'd like to share or something like that? If anyone has any, if you don't, it's cool. I just want to know. And does it count as a privilege in a sense, if that makes sense?
Personally, within college, I wouldn't say that I've had any privileged experiences by virtue of my skin color, but I guess overall access to education is a privilege, and the education I get is serving me in life now. But I wouldn't say, no, personally, I wouldn't have any particular experiences in particular about privilege, really, because of my backgrounds. But thanks for the question.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, thanks, Femi, for a question. It is, of course, I guess, when we were touching earlier about being privileged and advantages. Obviously, yeah, we maybe sometimes look at ourselves like, what is it directly that being advantage or benefit of? And yeah, one thing, I've not looked at, even with my time in the student movement and being elected, I've never considered why is it because I was Black that I was elected president, or because I was elected first union president? I know maybe it's hard to tell yourself if that was an advantage. If not, I think that's down to maybe the individual voters. If I ask them why did they vote for me, was it because of my color they voted for me, or is it because of my policies or what I could bring to the role? So that's maybe something I couldn't answer directly myself. But like Jacinta said, the opportunity to get an education and to get the opportunities that I have been given is an advantage of itself. So hopefully that kind of answers your question.
Yeah, I wouldn't have too much to add. I would kind of more agree with Jacinta as well in terms of like on the premises of my skin color. I suppose no, I don't think I've experienced anything that I would consider like privilege in that sense. And just on the basis of like my skin color, I don't think there would be anything in that case. But I do think something that's really interesting, probably from a different perspective, is perhaps the spaces that a lot of Black people can occupy now these days. I think that there's a privilege there in that we get to carry a lot of our people with us. So for example, even things like Black and Irish, me being able to be in the position that I am in USI as a student union officer, I think that there's a privilege there. Whether it was on the basis of my skin color, I don't know, but I do believe that as a Black woman in an organization like USI, I do think I have a privilege to be able to carry people who look like me along with me on the journey and be able to elevate those voices up as well. That's just from a different perspective, however. So.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for the questions and comments. And I know, Jacinta, you have a comment there, I think from one of the points you touched. They just said thanks, and I think parity totally makes sense. And then there's a comment there. I think you've read that comment there.
Yes, legends. Yeah. Thanks, guys.
And then I'll probably, like, it's 1:45 now. If anyone has any more comments to put in, but if you want to like say something, one last thing, or like a topic or that you want to touch on, because I know Zoom fatigue is a thing and everyone's just after coming back from college, and we've been going for like nearly 45 minutes. But if you have like one final thing to say, and we can probably close it at that. We don't want to stay on for too long. If each one of you want to touch on anything or close, and we should be done. So
I will ask a question, because I did touch on it earlier that nobody touched on, which I said was being an ally, and we didn't talk about it. So I was like, maybe I don't want to be that dude who's like hyping people up about allyship and then you never talk about it. So I was just wondering how to be maybe an active ally to the Black community, if maybe that's a topic you guys want to talk on.
I would say just listen, don't try and take over the movement per se, but just partnership, togetherness, inclusion, and it's a thing we have to all do together, and if there's something I will advise to never do is, so I have friends who may witness a racial incident, say even if I'm not there, and they'll tell me the story in grave detail, like they'll be unloading it, like, oh, and this racist thing happened and they said this, and they don't realize that they're kind of re-traumatizing me or like unloading this racial incident, and they think they're being helpful by just telling me the story. But I'm telling you now, like, if you tell your Black friends like racial incidents that they weren't there for, like, it's not helpful. I don't think it's helpful. It's only something I've become aware of recently, but and I think people telling these stories feel that it makes them look like they're conscious and aware that racism happened and they're hyper aware, but I don't want to hear the story unless if I respond saying, okay, then what did you do about it? And then it's like, nothing, I just watched. So just don't traumatize your friends with stories, I would say.
I think I understand that from the LGBT kind of point, where people are like, oh, to me, they're like, oh, well, this happened, I seen it. And I'm like, well, did you do something? They're like, oh, no, but I just wanted to tell you, like, I stood there and I listened. And I'm like, well, but there's a difference between allyship and then active allyship. So that's something I think you touch on there, which is listening and maybe not re-traumatizing your friends. Very good, thank you.
Thanks, Fionn.
Good point, Jacinta. And just to add to that, I think that kind of almost sometimes feeds into the mindset of sometimes people want to be an ally, they kind of overdo it sometimes. And I know, of course, people maybe on the side of like, trying to proclaim themselves that they're not a racist. And I think that was probably a risk when it was, after George Floyd, people out there posting things or, coming up to you and being like, oh yeah, I have a Black friend and all that kind of stuff. Like, so there's no need for that kind of because that can sometimes go too far. And because I feel like if you're too much out there, then you can become blinded to the real facts of racism sometimes. And like, Jacinta said, like, you know, when they actually maybe direct into terms like, okay, when you last saw a racist incident, what did you do? And they're like, oh, because they're so trying to show the fact that they're either not racist or they're trying to say they're an ally. So, you know, if you stick to the basics of, you know, if you know a friend or if you've seen someone who's experienced racism, and be there for them, you know, be a support, check that they're okay, and support them if they want to report it or take it to someone that can help with the situation. But I think, leaning on the person who's experienced it and not being trying to overtake or anything like that. But at the end of the day, keep yourselves informed as much as possible. There's so much, you know, as much as we've spoken this evening, as if we're not experts on racism, not at all, in any case, same shape or form. We're only just giving our own experiences on our level of knowledge. But there's so much more we can learn. There's so much more that everybody else can learn. So, you know, if we continue all to learn, then hopefully little by little, we can all try to improve society and improve our behavior. So that's my last point.
I love those 2 points. They're really great. The whole comment on like not dragging your friend or anyone you're listening to through the trauma again. I think that's really important. I would have like maybe 2 things to say. The first thing I would kind of say is really understanding that perhaps maybe anyone you know who's Black might not have the same like experiences as you. And I don't mean experiences as in like racial experiences. I just mean experiences in general. And I'll use an example so you can maybe understand me better. As a Black person, I grew up around Black culture, and this is just my life story. So I grew up around a lot of Black culture at home, and you know, anytime I see a Black person, I just naturally vibe with them, and that's just the way things are for me. So like some things are going to be quite different for your Black friends, in that what they experience and what they've consumed over their lifetime might be completely different to what you, as perhaps a non-Black person, have experienced in their own life, and that could be movies. So like when I'm talking to my friends, I might say to them sometimes like, I don't watch that kind of stuff because I prefer watching X show because it's got Black stories or whatever, et cetera, et cetera. Don't be weird about it. It's okay. It's just the way some people experience, you know, their lives. And that's just something to just be mindful of, and just know that like they're going to have different experiences. And if you understand that, it's okay. And then you can kind of understand where to go from when it comes to the balance of like whatever relationship you have with them. The second thing that I would also say is, I talk about this quite a lot, especially I think Hamza, you would know I mentioned this quite a bit to you, the whole conversation around the struggle. Believe it or not, we don't always love talking about that, you know what I mean? And we don't always love talking about the struggle. We don't always want to, you know, talk about like how every day is tough for us as a Black person. Sometimes we just want to embrace our culture. Sometimes we want to share our successes and share our stories as that are happy, you know, and positive and joyful and things like that. And I find that like whenever something crops up that's partially like racially motivated or fully racially motivated, everyone wants to start asking you about like the trauma and the struggle. And like sometimes we don't want to talk about it. We just want to talk about that culture and that fun part and that like positive part of our lives and our experiences. So that's something that I would say in terms of like the not to do. So yeah.
I think that's great as well. The not what to do. I think it's pretty informative. You know, I see Lauren, there goes, just live your life. Yes, exactly. I say you just want to live your life, exactly. And again, I think everyone, like you were talking about privileges, I think everyone just hates being dragged through trauma. So I think just that's the point of the night as well.
That is amazing. Thank you so much, guys. And I obviously back all their comments as well. So we will hopefully close now, because I'm sure everyone is tired and wants to get some food into them. And I would like to thank all the panelists, so Bukky, Pierre and Jacinta. And thank you for everyone coming along. We do have more Black History Month events happening. So if you check our Instagram and our TWSU website, and if you give Black and Irish a follow on Instagram, they have some great Black and History Month events as well happening. So give them a follow on Instagram. And thank you so much, guys.
Thanks,
and thank
Hamza.
You so much again.
Thanks, Fionn. Thanks, Bukky. Thanks, Pierre. Good to see you.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys. Good to see you again. Thanks, Hamza.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks. See you. Tatsu.
Bye.
Bye.
See you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.